Hello, Becky here for artbeads.com, and I've got a brand new video for you today. Today we're going to be talking about bead weaving basics, specifically how to use thread when you're bead weaving. I'm going to show you how to start your thread, how much thread to work with, how to end your thread, how to add in more thread when you are bead weaving. And this applies to a lot of different stitches, whether it's peyote stitch, loom work, or some of those tubular stitches as well. This is great information to have when you're just starting out with bead weaving. So let's dive into some of those thread basics. Whether you're doing peyote stitch, square stitch, weaving on a loom, or any one of the many other bead stitches, the amount of thread you work with, the way you add thread when you run out, and the way you tie off the thread when you are done is basically the same. In this video, I'll answer some common questions that beaders have when working with thread in bead weaving, and then I'll show you some examples of how this is done. One of the first things I want to talk about is what kind of thread you should use. We have a lot of beading thread options on our website, artbeads.com, and we like to choose thread that's easy to work with, doesn't tangle or fray a lot, and will match the colors of your beads that you're working with. That's always nice. Some really good basics to have are black and white colors, but we do offer a lot of other colors. One of my favorite beading threads to work with is Toho 1G beading thread. It comes in a lot of colors that match Toho seed beads and other beads really nicely, and it's really nice to work with. It doesn't tangle or fray a whole lot. Other great options are KO beading thread. This is another one that comes in a lot of colors and is really not too fussy to work with, doesn't tangle or fray a whole lot. Miyuki beading thread is also great. Again, lots of colors available. We also have Hana beading thread, which has really vibrant colors to choose from. This is a really great option if you're working with vibrant colors of beads. I did want to mention that another great thread to work with, especially if you're working with crystal beads, is Firelime. Crystal beads can sometimes cut your beading thread, and you don't want that to happen, so I would recommend using Fireline for something like that because it is a different type of material, and the crystal is not going to cut the Fireline. So we have Fireline available in black and white colors, I believe gray as well, and different sizes, 4-pound tests, 8-pound tests, 6-pound test sizes like that. And that just means that the thread has been tested for strength at different weights. So this one has a breaking point at 4 pounds. There's some that are at 6 pounds, 8 pounds, so on. I like to use 6 or 8 pounds for bead weaving. 4 pounds will also work. Lots of versatility when it comes to choosing exactly which beading thread you want to use. Another common question once you've chosen the beading thread that you want to work with is, how much thread should I put on the needle? How much thread should I work with when I'm bead weaving? Starting with the entire amount of thread needed for a project is not necessary. Regardless of the size of the project or the number of beads that are used, you should work with a manageable length of thread on the needle. A manageable length is probably about around 1 to 2 yards. If you use any more than that, you run the risk of the thread twisting, tangling, or knotting, and that can be frustrating and ultimately lead to the thread becoming a tangled mess or even breaking. And besides being difficult to manage, if the thread is, if it's too long, friction from weaving through the beads over and over can really start to wear the thread out. It'll become frayed by the time you get to the end of your project, and that's going to make your thread less durable. So you don't want that. The average project could use many yards of thread, which would be impossible to work with, so you always kind of want to plan on adding more thread as needed. What I like to do is I usually use about 3 feet or a yard. I'll wind it out and stretch my arms wide. I'll show you what I do here. So I will take my thread and unspool it to about an arm span width, and that's about how much I like to start with. All right, you've chosen your thread, you've started to weave your piece, but you you're running out of length. Your thread is getting short. So what do? You will tie or finish the thread off by weaving it into the body of the project in progress until it is secure. This will lock the thread in place. I'll show you how to do that here on this peyote stitch piece, but remember, the general idea is the same for most stitches, even trims and fringe. You just follow the thread path of the stitch type you are working with. There are some basic rules to consider when doing this. You want to plan to tie off the thread before it gets too short, and it's easier to tie the thread off if you have several inches to work with. Approximately 6 to 8 inches, about what I have here, is a good amount, and if you do this in the middle of a row, it will be easier to hide the threads. And to keep the edges of the project clean, don't weave on the outside. So don't use those beads on the outer edges. Do the weaving in the middle of the project. Make sure to keep the thread inside the beads or between the rows of beads, not over a bead. You don't want to skip over a bead like this. It's not following the thread path, because you will see that thread on the surface of your project. So you don't want to do that. When you are done, you shouldn't see any threads. And don't go through beads that you will need to go through again later when you start to add more thread, if you can help it. You may not be able to get the thread through a particular bead or section of beads if you have too many multiple threads running through it. So if you plan on adding a trim or fringe, you will need to weave through the beads near the edges. So keep those clear of extra threads. So I will show you how to finish and secure your thread when it's getting too short. So I'm going to follow the path of the weave that I am working with here. And I'm just gonna kind of loop back around through these same beads. And that looping around will kind of catch other threads within the weave. And that's gonna create a really nice, secure hold. So I'm just looping around and around, following the path of the beads to secure this thread in place. You're going to want to do that in several spots, several times, to really get this thread secure. And by going through, looping through this many times, I'm catching other threads within the weave, locking it in place. Okay, so I've done that several times. I'm going to give it a little tug just to see if I feel any movement, and that feels really secure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim off that too short thread. A note for herringbone stitches: when finishing threads for herringbone, it's better to just weave the thread following the thread path of the stitch without circling or looping through the beads like I just did for peyote stitch. The nature of that stitch will lock the thread in place over the course of a row or two. So just follow the same thread path of the original stitch for herringbone. If you make circles or loops with the thread, that will alter the herringbone pattern. And we have diagrams on our website that illustrate how to kind of loop your thread around in different stitches. So I will add a link to those diagrams in the video description. Okay, you've secured your short thread. Now how do you add a new one? You will add a new thread in the same manner by weaving the thread into the body of the project and then weaving it to the bead where you left off. So all of the same rules apply. Alright, so I've got my arm span length of thread onto the needle. I'm going to weave it back in and then position my thread where I need it to be to continue the piece. Obviously, I'm doing this on a finished piece. You would be doing this on a piece in progress. You would weave back to the bead where you left off. So I'm just going to pick a spot here in the middle of the weave. I'm going through 2 beads. And I'm going to pull my thread so that there's just a little bit of tail that we will snip off once everything is secure. And I'm just going to loop around. So I'm coming through the next 2 beads over from the 2 beads I just went through. And I'm going to loop back through those 2 beads I originally came from to form my initial loop. And that's pretty secure, but just to be safe, we want to loop again. So I'm just going to make another loop. You can do this loop through 2 beads, through 4 beads, maybe do a variety of between 2 and 4 beads. Just get your thread secure here. So I'm going to loop through 3. So I've come through 1 bead and I'm going to loop through the next 2 beads over. And then just loop around through this bead. And when I'm looping, I like to loop my way, can progress my loops up towards the position I need to be in. So once I feel like I've got a secure thread in place, I'm closer to get my needle in position to where I need to continue the stitch. So I'm going to give that a tug. You can see that tail thread is not budging. It feels really secure. So from here, I would work my thread up through the body of the beads to where I need to continue the stitch, and then I would just trim off this tail. To finish off a tail of thread, maybe at the beginning or end of your project, same techniques apply. You will tie them off the same way, or you can even use the tails for adding closures such as buttons and loops. So always keep that in mind when leaving length for the tail. If you plan on adding a closure or a button or loop, make sure the tail is long enough to do that. Another question we get a lot is if you should knot your thread, to knot or not. In general, the weaving method for tying off and adding thread is very secure, and knots are not necessary, but there are some occasions where knots are a good idea. For example, if the bead hole sizes you are working with are a loose fit on the threads, the weaving may work its way out of the bead. So these are really small, tightly woven beads. The thread's not going to work its way out of these beads. They're so small and so close together. But on something with larger beads, maybe it might be helpful to add a knot. Another question is, what if my thread breaks and it is too short to weave back into the project? That's okay, you can fix it. If your thread breaks and it is too short to weave or knot in the project, leave it where it is. Add a new thread a few rows from the end, then weave this thread through the last few rows of beads to secure them. So you're really just going back through those last few rows that you used with the broken thread, and you can loop around in several spots. And you can tie a knot too here and there if you like. That'll really keep it secure. Then continue weaving with the new thread, and then you can trim the old one after you have a few new rows of beads secured. So with those steps, you can fix any project. I have definitely had to either work with a broken thread or even cut out a row that I messed up on. And I knew I could do that without damaging my entire project because I could weave in a new thread to fix it. And then just one more note, remember that the location of the thread path doesn't need to match my examples exactly. Just follow the guidelines of that looping or knotting to do what feels right for your project. And pretty soon you will be a natural at starting your threads, ending your threads, weaving in tails, adding new threads. You'll be a pro. So hopefully you found this video helpful. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope this video was helpful to you. Let me know if you have any questions about thread when you're bead weaving. And as always, make sure to subscribe so you're the first to know when videos like this are out. Once again, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.